Welcome to Night Shift Pulse. Comment your city and the time below. The night connects us all. If you enjoy what you hear, please subscribe. Let's step into the dark. Story 1. The ER Tech's Unclaimed Triage Tag. I found the tag at 11:47 p.m., sitting in the completed stack when I returned from my break. It was a yellow tag, Priority 3, non-urgent. The timestamp read 11:32 p.m., printed clean and official. Patient name Dalton, M. Chief complaint, persistent headache. Vital signs recorded, all within normal range. But there was no corresponding patient in the waiting room, no chart pulled, no nurse assigned. At St. Catherine Regional, I'd worked emergency intake for 6 years. Triage was muscle memory by that point. Assess, tag, log, direct. We used color-coded wristbands synced to a central tracking system. Yellow tags meant stable enough to wait. Red meant immediate intervention. Green could go home with instructions. Black meant we'd already lost them. Every tag printed from the same thermal machine behind my desk, triggered only when I scanned a patient's temporary ID barcode and entered their information. The system didn't allow duplicates. It didn't print tags for ghosts. I asked Denise, the charge nurse on duty, if she'd processed anyone named Dalton. She checked her tablet and shook her head. No Dalton in the system tonight. No Dalton checked in at the front desk. I looked at the tag again, turning it over in my hands. The barcode was legitimate, scannable. When I ran it through the system, it populated a full electronic chart. Insurance verified. Emergency contact listed, previous visits documented going back 4 years. All routine, all unremarkable. The waiting room held 8 people that night. I knew each one by name and complaint. Motorcycle laceration waiting for sutures. Possible kidney stone needing imaging. Diabetic with fluctuating glucose. Elderly woman with chest pain already moved to observation. None of them were Dalton M. I placed the tag on my desk and continued working. An ambulance brought in a construction worker with a compound fracture. I processed him, printed his red tag, got him moving toward Trauma Bay 2. When I returned to my station, the yellow tag was gone. I found it 20 minutes later, clipped to the edge of the Trauma Bay 2 door just beneath the red tag I'd printed, as if someone had tried to enter but hadn't quite made it inside. I removed it and brought it back to my desk. Denise saw me staring at it and asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, just confused about a processing error. She suggested I void the tag and move on. We were heading into the busiest part of the night, but when I tried to void it in the system, the option was grayed out. The chart showed Dalton M. as actively checked in, waiting for evaluation. At 1:14 a.m., I found the tag clipped to the nurse's station counter. At 2:03 a.m., it was attached to the medication card outside Bay 4. Each time I returned it to my desk. Each time I checked the waiting room. No one knew it arrived. No one matched the name or description auto-generated in the chart. Male, 34 years old, no known drug allergies, no significant medical history. By 3 a.m., I stopped retrieving it. I let it sit wherever it appeared. I watched as it migrated through the department. It showed up on gurneys, clipped to IV poles, tucked into clipboards. Always visible, always in motion. Always unattached to an actual patient. Other staff walked past it without comment. I started to wonder if I was the only one seeing it. At 4:30 a.m., during a lull, I pulled up the tracking log. Every tag printed that night was accounted for. Every tag had a corresponding patient except one. The system listed Dalton M. as having been evaluated by Dr. Brennan, treated with standard care protocols, and discharged at 4:17 a.m. with follow-up instructions. I asked Dr. Brennan when he'd seen Dalton. He looked at me blankly and said he hadn't treated anyone by that name all night. I went to find the tag. It was gone. I checked every bay, every cart, every counter. I searched the waiting room, the discharge area, the supply closets. Nothing. I returned to my desk and checked the system one final time. The chart was closed. Discharge summary completed. Patient left the facility in stable condition. The timestamp matched perfectly with the final location I'd seen the tag. Clipped to the automatic exit doors leading out to the ambulance bay. When my shift ended at 7 a.m., I printed the encounter summary. I needed proof that I wasn't imagining it. The document generated normally. Patient name, visit details, treatment notes, discharge time. But when I looked at the signature line for the attending physician, it was blank. And beneath the patient demographics, in the section listing who had initially triaged and tagged the case, I saw my name and credentials clearly printed. But I didn't remember processing anyone named Dalton. I didn't remember printing that tag. I filed the summary in my bag and drove home. That night, I dreamed I was back at the triage desk, processing an endless line of patients. Each one I tagged and sent through, each one moved deeper into the department. But when I looked at the waiting room, it was always full. No matter how many I processed, no one ever left. The tags just kept printing, stacking higher, each one a different color, each one carrying a name I almost recognized. I've worked 73 shifts since that night. The tag hasn't reappeared. But sometimes when I check the discharge logs in the morning, I find names I don't remember processing. Patients I don't recall seeing. Charts that close themselves while I'm looking elsewhere. I've stopped asking other staff about it. They don't see what I see. Or maybe they do, and they've learned it's easier not to mention it. There are systems in hospitals that operate beyond our protocols. Records that complete themselves. Patients who pass through without ever being seen. And sometimes, the only evidence they were ever here is a tag that refuses to stay discarded. Story 2. The radiology technician and the extra exposure. Midnight radiology was quiet work. Most requests came through as confirmations, follow-up imaging, or last-minute checks before surgeries scheduled for early morning. I'd been a radiology technician at Mercy General for 9 years. The rhythm of night shift suited me. The hum of the machines, the methodical positioning, the cool blue glow of monitors. After midnight, the department belonged to me and whoever needed imaging. No crowds, no scheduling conflicts, just the clean repetition of exposure, development, review. The request came through at 12:38 a.m. Chest X-ray, routine post-operative check. Patient name, Garrett Flynn. Post-surgical pneumonia concern. Standard 2-view study, post-arrow anterior and lateral. I prepped the room, checked the equipment calibration logs, and brought Garrett in from recovery. He was groggy but cooperative, a thin man in his late 50s recovering from gallbladder removal. I positioned him against the plate, instructed him on breath holding, and stepped behind the shielded console. First exposure. Clean click, brief hum, image capture confirmed. I checked the monitor. The image was sharp, lung fields clear, heart size normal, skeletal structure intact. But there was something else, a second silhouette, faint but distinct, overlapping Garrett's torso. Not an artifact, not a shadow, a human shape. Perfectly aligned with his position but slightly offset, as though someone had been standing directly behind him during exposure. I stared at the image. In 9 years, I'd seen plenty of technical glitches. Double exposures caused by improper cassette clearing, motion blur from patients who couldn't stay still, reflections from metal objects. But this was different. The second shape had anatomical structure, ribs, spine, clavicles, all precisely rendered, all overlapping Garrett's image like a translucent echo. I ran a second exposure, lateral view, same result. 2 silhouettes perfectly synchronized. I checked the equipment. Calibration was current. No foreign objects in the imaging field. No secondary sources of radiation. I asked Garrett if he'd been wearing anything unusual, any metal, any dense fabric. He shook his head slowly, confused by the question. I told him we were done and sent him back to recovery. I spent 40 minutes reviewing the images. I adjusted contrast, inverted the exposure, isolated segments. The second silhouette remained consistent. Bone density matched human structure. The positioning suggested someone of similar height and build standing less than 6 inches behind Garrett during exposure. But the room had been empty. I'd checked before bringing him in, standard protocol. And I'd been watching through the shielded window during both exposures. No one else had entered. I filed the images and wrote a note in the report. Technical anomaly under review, recommend repeat imaging. But I didn't recommend it to anyone. I just archived the files and moved on to the next request. Abdominal series for a suspected bowel obstruction. Skull films for a head injury. Both came back clean, normal, exactly as expected. At 3:20 a.m. I received another request. Follow-up chest x-ray for a patient named Monica Trent. Pneumonia treatment assessment. I brought her down from the medical ward. She was alert, breathing easier than her chart suggested. I positioned her, ran the exposure, checked the monitor. 2 silhouettes, hers and another directly behind her. Same offset, same anatomical precision. I stopped the exam and told Monica I needed to recalibrate the equipment. She waited on a chair outside while I ran a calibration test using the Phantom imaging block, a human torso-shaped device filled with materials that mimic bone and tissue density. The test returned perfect. No errors, no drift, no secondary exposures. I brought Monica back in and completed the study. Every image showed 2 figures. I didn't file a report this time. I went to the archives and pulled older studies. Random patients, random dates going back 3 months. I found it in 12% of the night shift chest x-rays. The second silhouette, always present, always aligned, always unnoticed, or at least never documented. I checked the interpretation reports written by the radiologists. None of them mentioned it. They read the images as normal, lungs clear, no abnormalities detected, patient stable. I wondered if I was seeing something they couldn't, or if they'd learned to ignore it. At 4:41 a.m. I received a request from the emergency department. Trauma patient, possible rib fracture. I brought him in. Young man, early 20s, motorcycle accident, conscious, in pain, but stable. I positioned him carefully, ran the exposure. 2 silhouettes. I ran a second exposure from a different angle. 2 silhouettes. I checked the archived images from his previous visit, a minor wrist fracture from 8 months earlier. The wrist films were clean, no secondary shape, but those had been taken during day shift. I started cross-referencing. Every night shift chest x-ray processed between midnight and 6 a.m. showed the anomaly. Every day shift study was clean. The difference wasn't the equipment, it was the time. I pulled the oldest archived night study I could access from 6 years earlier before I'd started working at Mercy General. Different technician, different patient, same result. The second silhouette had been there all along. I checked the metadata on the images. Each one listed the correct exposure settings, correct patient positioning, correct equipment ID. But buried in the technical log data beneath layers of automated timestamps, I found something else. A secondary capture notation, as if the system had recorded 2 separate exposures simultaneously, layered into one image file. I ran a test. I set up the imaging plate, positioned the Phantom block, and ran an exposure with no one in the room. The image came back normal, just the Phantom block. I ran another exposure at 5:15 a.m. with the Phantom block in position, 2 silhouettes, the block and something else standing behind it. I printed the image. I held it up to the light. The second shape was clearer now, more defined than in any patient study. I could see the curvature of the spine, the delicate structure of the ribs, the symmetry of the shoulders. It wasn't an error. It wasn't random noise. It was a complete, anatomically correct human form captured on film in an empty room. I checked the equipment logs. The machine had been installed 11 years earlier. Routine maintenance, regular calibration, no major malfunctions. I pulled the installation records. The imaging suite had been built on the site of an old hospital wing, demolished in the early 2000s. Before that, it had been part of the original Mercy General structure dating back to the 1940s. I found a reference to the old radiology department, located in the same footprint as the current suite. It had been operational until 1997 when the building was condemned after structural issues were discovered. I found one more thing. A notation in the old facility logs, handwritten and scanned into the digital archive. A complaint from a night shift radiology technician in 1996 about persistent equipment malfunctions. Double exposures, unexplained shadows, images that showed figures not present during capture. The complaint was marked as resolved with a note, "Equipment replaced, issue ceased." But it hadn't ceased. It had just waited. My shift ended at 7:30 a.m. I filed my reports, logged the night's imaging studies, and left the suite. I didn't mention the second silhouettes. I didn't explain what I'd found. When I got home, I searched for records of the 1996 technician. I found an obituary. He died in 2003, cause of death not listed. I found his employment records. He'd worked at Mercy General for 14 years, almost exclusively night shifts in radiology. I've worked 62 night shifts since then. The second silhouette appears in every chest X-ray I process after midnight. I've stopped checking for it. I've stopped trying to explain it. The radiologists read the images as clean. The patients recover or don't, unrelated to what I see on film. And sometimes, late into the shift when the department is silent and the machines hum in standby mode, I feel someone standing behind me at the console. Not close enough to touch, but present enough to know. I don't turn around anymore. I just complete the exposure and move to the next patient. There are things we capture on film that were never meant to be documented, and once you learn to see them, they never stop appearing. Story 3. The night receptionist who checked in after closing. I started working overnight reception at Riverside Medical Center in late September. The position was straightforward. Answer phones, transfer calls, maintain the visitor log, monitor the front entrance. The hospital scaled down after 8 p.m. Visiting hours ended. Outpatient services closed. Only emergency ICU and essential staff remained. My desk sat in the main lobby facing the automatic glass doors with a clear view of the elevators and the main corridor leading toward the emergency wing. The shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. For the first 3 weeks, it was exactly what I expected. Quiet, predictable. Phone calls from families asking about patient status. Occasional late visitors needing directions, delivery drivers dropping off supplies. I logged each visitor in the sign-in sheet, a physical ledger we still maintained for security audits. Name, time in, time out, reason for visit. Simple documentation. The first anomaly appeared on October 14th. I arrived at 10 p.m. and began my usual opening routine. I checked the phone system, confirmed the after-hours voicemail was active, reviewed the previous shift's notes. Then I opened the visitor log to start a fresh page for the night. But the page was already filled. One entry written in blue ink at the top of the sheet. Name, Claire Weston. Time in, 11:42 p.m. Time out, 5:53 a.m. Reason for visit, shift coverage. I stared at the entry. My name is Claire Weston. I'd been the night receptionist for 3 weeks. But I hadn't written that entry. I checked the date at the top of the page. October 14th. Today's date. I flipped back to the previous night's log. My handwriting filled that page, documenting 3 visitors, 2 phone calls logged for follow-up, nothing unusual. I turned back to tonight's page. The entry remained written in handwriting that looked almost identical to mine, but not quite. The loops were tighter, the slant was sharper. I checked with Darren, the security guard stationed near the emergency entrance. He'd been on duty since 6 p.m. I asked if anyone had accessed the front desk before I arrived. He checked his logs and said no. No one had entered the main lobby except staff using their badge access, and none of them had approached the reception desk. I went back to my station and looked at the entry again. I considered crossing it out, voiding it, starting a new page. But something stopped me. Instead, I drew a single line beneath it and began logging visitors below. The night proceeded normally. A visitor at 11:15 for a patient in ICU. A maintenance contractor checking the HVAC system. A late-night pharmacy delivery. I documented each one. At 5:45 a.m., as I prepared my end-of-shift notes, I glanced at the log one more time. The entry at the top, my name and shift times, remained exactly as I'd found it, but the timeout had updated. It now read 6:02 a.m., a time that hadn't occurred yet. I left at 6:05 a.m. after the day shift receptionist arrived. I didn't mention the log entry. I drove home and tried to sleep, but my mind kept circling back to the handwriting. The almost but not quite match. The preemptive time stamps. The next night, October 15th, I opened the log. Another entry, same format. Claire Weston, time in 11:38 p.m., time out 5:59 a.m., reason for visit, shift coverage. But I'd arrived at 10 p.m., same as always. I hadn't written it. I checked the previous night's page. My entries were there, properly documented. I flipped forward. Tonight's page already had my name at the top in that handwriting that wasn't quite mine. I decided to test it. I took a photo of the entry with my phone, time-stamped at 10:12 p.m. Then I worked my shift. I didn't write anything in the log. I left the page blank below the pre-filled entry. At the end of the night, I checked again. The entry had updated. Time out now read 6:01 a.m., and below it in my actual handwriting were the visitors I'd logged throughout the night, written in real time as they occurred. But I hadn't written the first entry. I compared the photo on my phone to the current page. The handwriting matched exactly, but the timeout had changed. It updated itself. I started arriving earlier at 9:45 p.m. to see if the entry appeared while I was there. It didn't. The log was always already filled when I opened it at the start of my shift, no matter how early I arrived. I asked Marie, the day shift receptionist, if she'd experienced anything similar. She looked at me strangely and said the logs were always clean when she arrived, just my end-of-shift notes and the visitor entries. I showed her the top entry on that night's page. She read it and frowned. She said it looked like my handwriting. I told her I hadn't written it. She suggested I was working too many hours, maybe documenting things automatically and forgetting. I didn't argue. By early November, the entries appeared every night. Always the same format, always my name, always listing shift coverage as the reason. I stopped questioning it. I just drew a line beneath the entry and continued my work. But I started noticing other things, calls transferring before I touched the switchboard, visitor badges printing before I activated the system, doors unlocking as I approached before I scanned my access card. On November 19th, I stayed late after my shift. I hid in the staff lounge adjacent to the lobby and watched the reception desk through the window. The day shift receptionist, Marie, worked through the morning. At 2:30 p.m., she took her break. The desk sat empty for 12 minutes. I watched the visitor log, closed on the desktop. It didn't move. No one approached. At 2:42 p.m., Marie returned and resumed her work. That evening, when I arrived at 10 p.m., I opened the log. The entry was there. Claire Weston, time in 11:41 p.m., time out 6:04 a.m. I checked the security footage. I had access through the hospital's internal monitoring system for front entrance verification. I pulled the recording from that afternoon. At 2:36 p.m., while the desk was empty, the visitor log opened. Pages turned. A pen lifted from the holder. The entry wrote itself, letters forming in real time, invisible hand guiding the pen. The log closed. The pen returned to its holder. 73 seconds, start to finish. I watched the footage 4 times. There was no one at the desk. No reflection, no shadow, no technical glitch. Just the autonomous movement of a pen, filling out a log entry 8 hours before the shift it documented. I stopped checking the log after that. I just worked my shifts, answered phones, logged visitors, maintained the desk. But the sense of overlap grew stronger. I'd reach for the phone and it would already be ringing. I'd begin typing an email and the words would auto-complete in my exact phrasing. I'd walk toward the supply closet and the door would already be unlocked. On December 6th, I found something else. An old employee directory in the records room dated 2007. I wasn't looking for it. I was filing incident reports and saw the binder on a lower shelf, dusty and unopened. I pulled it out. I flipped through the pages. I found my name. Claire Weston, night receptionist, Riverside Medical Center, hired July 2007. Terminated March 2008. Reason? Unspecified. I was hired in September 2023. I'd never worked here before. I checked my employment records. Start date confirmed, background check completed, references verified, everything current. But the directory listing was printed, official, archived. I looked at the photo next to the name. It was me, same face, same expression, taken in front of the same reception desk I sat at now. I brought the directory to HR the next morning. I asked about the listing. The coordinator checked the system and said there was no record of a Claire Weston employed before my current hire date. I showed her the directory. She examined it and said it must be a filing error, maybe a duplicate name, maybe a scanning glitch from when they digitized old records. She assured me it wasn't me. I'd only been here since September, but the entry in the visitor log kept appearing. Every night. Same name, same shift times. Same handwriting that wasn't quite mine, but close enough that no one else noticed. And the timestamps kept updating in real time, documenting a shift I hadn't started yet, actions I hadn't taken, hours I hadn't worked. I stopped trying to explain it. I just worked my shifts and ignored the pre-filled entry. But sometimes, in the early hours when the lobby is silent and the lights hum in their fixtures, I feel myself splitting. One version sitting at the desk, answering phones, logging visitors. Another version already gone, already finished, already documenting the shift before it happens, and I wonder which one is real. Which one will still be here when the timeout finally stops updating. Story 4. The blood bank technician's reconciled shortage. I'd been a blood bank technician at Grantham Memorial for 11 years. Inventory management was the core of the role. Every unit of blood that entered the facility was logged, tested, typed, cross-matched, and tracked through its entire life cycle. From collection to transfusion to disposal, nothing moved without documentation. The system was airtight. It had to be. Lives depended on accurate counts, compatible matches, and zero margin for error. Night shifts in the blood bank were quiet but exacting. Fewer transfusions, more time for audits, restocking, quality control. I worked 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Wednesday through Saturday. My supervisor, Angela, handled the day audits. I handled the overnight reconciliations. Every Thursday at 1 a.m., I ran a complete inventory check comparing physical units in the refrigeration system against the digital logs. Discrepancies were rare. When they occurred, they were always traceable. A misscanned barcode, a unit transferred to surgery but not logged out, a damaged bag removed and discarded with incomplete documentation. The first shortage appeared on November 3rd. I ran the Thursday audit and found a discrepancy. One unit of O negative missing. The digital log showed it should be in refrigerator 3, bay 12. The physical inventory showed an empty slot. I checked the transfusion records. No O negative had been issued that week. I checked the discard logs. Nothing. I rescanned every unit in every bay. The count came up one short. I filed an incident report and flagged the unit number for investigation. Angela reviewed it the next day and found the same discrepancy. She traced the unit back to its origin. It had been collected at a community blood drive 4 weeks earlier, processed and tested on site, and entered into inventory on October 9th. Standard shelf life for red blood cells is 42 days. The unit was still viable, still logged as available, but physically absent. Angela escalated the report. The quality assurance team reviewed our handling protocols, checked refrigeration logs for temperature deviations, interviewed staff. No findings. The unit had simply vanished from inventory without being used, damaged, or discarded. Angela adjusted the system count to match the physical inventory and marked the case as an unresolved loss. It happened. Rarely, but it happened. The investigation closed. The following Thursday, November 10th, I ran the audit again. Another shortage, one unit of A positive, same pattern, logged as present, physically absent, no transfusion record, no discard log, no transfer documentation. I filed another report. Angela investigated, same outcome, no explanation. The unit was written off as an inventory error. By the third week, I started noticing something else. The missing units were balancing themselves, not immediately, but within 48 hours of the audit. I'd run the Thursday count, find a shortage, file the report. By Saturday, when I ran a spot check, the count would be correct. The physical inventory would match the digital log, as if the missing unit had been returned. But there was no record of it being restocked. No delivery logs, no intake scans, no adjustment entries. The system just reconciled itself. I started documenting the pattern outside the official logs. Personal notes, time-stamped, with photos of the inventory screens and the physical units. On November 17th, I found a shortage of 2 units, both B negative. I photographed the empty bays. I ran the digital log and printed the discrepancy report. Then I locked the refrigeration unit and placed a tamper-evident seal on the door. No one could access it without leaving evidence. On November 19th, I returned and broke the seal. The 2 units were back, sitting in their logged positions, barcodes intact, temperature logs uninterrupted. The seal had not been tampered with. No one had accessed the unit. I checked the barcodes on the returned units. They matched the missing inventory exactly. I scanned them into the system. The log registered them as having been present the entire time, with no gap in their tracking history. I checked the transfusion records for the previous 48 hours. 3 B-negative units had been issued to surgery, but none of them matched the unit numbers that had been missing. They were different units pulled from different bays. I brought my documentation to Angela. I showed her the photos, the timestamps, the seal evidence. She reviewed it carefully and asked if I'd been working extra shifts, if I was tired, if I might have miscounted during the initial audit. I told her I'd triple-checked. She suggested the barcodes might have been obscured during the first count, causing a scanning error. I told her I'd photographed the empty bays. She said the photos showed slots that could have been temporarily empty during restocking. I asked her who had restocked them. She checked the access logs. No one had entered the blood bank between my Thursday audit and my Saturday check except me. I stopped escalating it. I just ran the audits and tracked the pattern. Every week a shortage appeared. Every week it resolved itself within 2 days. The units vanished and returned, unlogged, untouched, unaccounted for. I started cross-referencing the missing unit numbers with transfusion records, looking for any historical use. I found connections. Not recent transfusions, but old ones years earlier. The unit numbers matched blood that had been issued and transfused between 2016 and 2019. I pulled archived records. The units I was finding in current inventory had barcodes identical to units that had been issued and fully transfused years earlier. Impossible. Barcodes were unique, non-repeating, generated sequentially. A unit used in 2017 couldn't reappear in 2023 inventory with the same identifying number. But the system showed them as active, viable, available for transfusion. I traced one unit back to its original transfusion record. B-negative issued on March 4, 2017, transfused during an emergency surgery. Patient name, Daniel Kress. I checked the patient outcome. He'd survived the surgery, recovered, and been discharged. I checked further. Daniel Kress had been readmitted in August 2023 for unrelated cardiac issues. He'd required a transfusion. B-negative 2 units. I checked the unit numbers used. One of them matched the barcode from his 2017 transfusion. The same blood, issued twice, 6 years apart. I pulled more records. Every missing unit that resolved itself had a matching historical transfusion. The blood was recycling through the inventory, returning to circulation years after it had already been used. I checked the donation records for the original collections. Most of the donors were deceased. I cross-referenced obituaries, death records, hospital logs. They died months or years before their blood reappeared in inventory. I found my own records in the system. I donated blood 4 times over the past decade, all at Grantham Memorial. I checked the unit numbers. One of them appeared in current inventory, logged as viable, dated from 3 weeks ago. But I hadn't donated in 8 months. I pulled the detailed record. The collection date listed was October 27, 2023. I'd been at work that night running the overnight shift. I hadn't donated. I checked the donor signature on the digital form. It was mine. I checked the health screening questionnaire. It was filled out in my handwriting, scanned and uploaded. I checked the phlebotomy notes. They described me accurately. Height, weight, vein access, collection volume. But I had no memory of it. I checked my arms for needle marks. Nothing recent. I searched the access logs for October 27th. I'd badged into the blood bank at 10:03 p.m. and badged out at 6:11 a.m. Standard shift. No gaps, no anomalies. But according to the donation record, I'd also been a donor that night, processed at 2:17 a.m. I checked the surveillance footage. At 2:17 a.m., I was visible at my workstation running inventory checks. Alone, no one else in frame. But the donation record existed, signed and verified. The following Thursday, I ran the audit. Another shortage. 1 unit of O-negative. I checked the barcode. It was mine. The unit I'd supposedly donated but didn't remember giving. I locked the refrigeration unit again, placed another seal. On Saturday, I returned. The seal was intact. The unit was back in place, sitting in Bay 12, temperature stable, logged as having been there continuously. I scanned it. The system registered it as unused, available for transfusion, collected 4 weeks earlier. I checked the transfusion records from the previous 48 hours. Someone had received O-negative during an emergency procedure on Friday night. I pulled the case file. Trauma patient, severe hemorrhage, multiple transfusions required. I checked the unit numbers used. None of them matched mine. But I knew it didn't matter. The blood circulated outside the logs, moving through patients and back into inventory, reconciling shortages that shouldn't exist, completing transfusions that were never recorded. I stopped running the audits. I stopped filing reports. Angela asked me if I'd noticed any discrepancies recently. I told her everything had been balanced. She said that was good. We'd resolved the inventory issues. I didn't correct her. I just continued my shifts, restocking units, processing cross-matches, logging transfusions, and sometimes late into the night when the refrigeration units hum in their steady rhythm. I see my barcode on bags I never filled. I see donors who've been dead for years listed as active. I see transfusions that completed before they were ordered. And I know that somewhere in the system my blood is moving through patients I'll never meet. Returning to inventory, I'll continue to reconcile. Xunhuaning endlessly through a process that doesn't stop just because the donor is gone. Some systems close themselves, and the only way to know you're part of them is when your name appears in logs you didn't write. Story 5. The Sleep Clinic Technician and the Unscheduled Study. I'd worked as a polysomnographic technician at Westfield Sleep Center for 7 years. The job involved monitoring overnight sleep studies, tracking brain waves, breathing patterns, heart rhythms, and body movements while patients slept. We diagnosed sleep apnea, restless leg syndrome, narcolepsy, and a range of other disorders through careful observation and data collection. The clinic had 6 monitoring rooms, each equipped with a bed, infrared cameras, and comprehensive sensor arrays. I worked the overnight shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., usually monitoring 2 to 3 patients per night. The setup was precise. Patients arrived at 9 p.m. for pre-study preparation. I'd attach electrodes to their scalp, face, chest, and legs, connect them to the monitoring system, and explain the study process. Once they were settled, I'd return to the control room, a small windowless office filled with monitors displaying real-time data from each patient. EEG readings showing brain activity. EOG tracking eye movement. EMG measuring muscle tone. Respiratory belts monitoring breathing. Pulse oximetry tracking oxygen levels. Every physiological signal streamed live to my screens, painting a complete picture of each patient's sleep architecture. The first anomaly occurred on November 9th. I had 2 patients scheduled that night, room 3 and room 5. Room 4 sat empty, offline for the evening. No patient assigned, no equipment active, monitors dark. I settled my patients, returned to the control room, and began the study recordings at 10:42 p.m. The monitors for rooms 3 and 5 displayed expected data. Brain waves transitioning through wake to light sleep, breathing steady, heart rates declining, normal progression. At 11:37 p.m., the monitor for room 4 activated. I looked up from my notes and saw data streaming across the screen. EEG showing stage 2 sleep. EOG indicating minimal eye movement. EMG revealing muscle atonia. Respiratory rate at 14 breaths per minute. Heart rate at 61 beats per minute. A complete sleep study running in an empty room. I checked the equipment logs. Room 4 was marked as inactive, no patient assigned, sensors disconnected. I pulled up the camera feed for room 4. The infrared image showed an empty bed, covers undisturbed, no body present. But the data continued. Brain waves cycled through sleep stages, breathing patterns shifted. The system recorded a full polysomnographic study from a room with no one in it. I ran a diagnostic check on the monitoring equipment. No errors, no signal interference, no equipment malfunction. The sensors in room 4 were reading physiological data with the same clarity and precision as the occupied rooms. I checked the sensor connections. According to the system, all electrodes were attached and registering proper impedance. but there was no patient to attach them to. I documented the anomaly in the shift report and labeled it as an equipment error. I disabled the Room 4 monitor and continued tracking my actual patients. Both progressed through normal sleep cycles. I completed their studies, woke them at 6 a.m., removed the sensors, and generated their reports. In my end-of-shift notes, I mentioned the Room 4 malfunction and recommended a full system diagnostic. The maintenance technician reviewed the equipment the following afternoon. He found no faults, no wiring issues, no software bugs. He ran a calibration test. Everything measured correctly. He marked the room as operational. The next time I worked, November 13th, I had 3 patients scheduled. Rooms 2, 3, and 6. Room 4 remained empty. At 11:51 p.m., the Room 4 monitor activated again. Data streamed. EEG showed REM sleep. EOG indicated rapid eye movement. EMG showed the expected muscle paralysis that accompanies dreaming. I checked the camera feed. The bed was empty. This time, I didn't disable the monitor. I let it run. I watched the data progress through the night. The unscheduled study followed normal sleep architecture. Cycles of light sleep, deep sleep, and REM occurring in roughly 90-minute intervals. At one point, around 2:30 a.m., the data showed a brief arousal. Brain waves spiking to wakefulness for 11 seconds before settling back into stage 2 sleep. Exactly the kind of pattern I'd see if a patient shifted position or briefly woke to use the bathroom. I checked the audio feed. We recorded ambient sound in each room to capture snoring, breathing disturbances, or other auditory cues. The audio from Room 4 was silent except for a faint rhythmic sound. Breathing. Slow, steady, consistent with stage 3 sleep. I increased the volume. The breathing was clear, unambiguous. Inhale, exhale, pause. 14 breaths per minute, matching the respiratory data on the monitor. I saved the recording. At the end of the shift, I generated a full report from the Room 4 data, the same report I'd generate for any patient study. The system compiled the information into a professional diagnostic summary. Total sleep time, 6 hours and 43 minutes. Sleep efficiency, 92%. REM latency, 74 minutes. Apnea-hypopnea index, 1.2 events per hour. Normal study, no significant pathology. The report auto-populated with a patient name. I hadn't entered one. The system generated it from somewhere else. The name read Ainsley Holt. I checked the scheduling database. No patient named Ainsley Holt had ever been registered at Westfield Sleep Center. I searched the broader hospital system. No records. I searched public databases. I found an obituary. Ainsley Holt, deceased May 2017, age 34. Cause of death not listed. I filed the report in an offline folder and didn't mention it to the supervising physician. But I started tracking the pattern. Every shift I worked, if Room 4 was unoccupied, the monitor would activate between 11:30 and midnight. The same study would run, same sleep architecture, same breathing patterns, same brief arousals, same 6 to 7 hour duration. And at the end of each study, the system would generate a report under the name Ainsley Holt. I pulled the clinic's operational history. Westfield Sleep Center had opened in 2012. I found archived patient logs from the first 2 years. Ainsley Holt had been a patient. She'd undergone 3 separate sleep studies in 2013, all in Room 4, all for chronic insomnia. The studies showed fragmented sleep, frequent awakenings, low sleep efficiency. She'd been prescribed medication and referred for cognitive behavioral therapy. The last study was dated April 23, 2013. After that, no further records. I searched for her death record again. She died 4 years later in May 2017. I couldn't find details, but the obituary mentioned she'd struggled with long-term health issues. I wondered if the insomnia had ever resolved. I checked the data from the unscheduled studies. Perfect sleep, no fragmentation, no pathology. As if whatever had kept her awake in 2013 had finally been cured. On November 27th, I decided to enter room 4 during the study. The monitor showed active data, stage 3 deep sleep. I opened the door quietly and stepped inside. The room was dark except for the infrared glow of the camera. The bed was empty, covers flat. I approached slowly. The breathing sound was audible, not through the speakers, but in the room itself. I stood next to the bed. The mattress was slightly compressed as if bearing weight. I reached out and felt resistance, a faint warmth, a suggestion of presence. But I saw nothing. I returned to the control room. The data hadn't changed. The study continued undisturbed. I checked the video feed. The infrared camera showed me entering the room, standing next to the bed, reaching out and leaving. The bed remained empty in the frame, but the data persisted. Someone was sleeping in room 4. Someone the sensors recognized, the system monitored, and the reports documented. I started reviewing older surveillance footage from the clinic, archived files from 2013. I found recordings of Ainsley Holt's original studies. I watched her arrive, get prepared, settle into bed in room 4. The sensors attached, the study initiated. I watched her sleep, restless and fragmented, waking repeatedly. I compared the EEG patterns from her 2013 studies to the unscheduled studies running now. The brainwave signatures were identical. The same person, the same neural activity, separated by 10 years. On December 4th, I printed the latest report from the unscheduled study. I brought it to Dr. Emerson, the clinic director. I explained what I'd been observing. He reviewed the report and asked which patient it belonged to. I told him there was no patient. The study ran in an empty room. He looked at me carefully and asked if I'd been feeling well, if the overnight shifts were affecting my judgment. I showed him the archived footage, the sensor data, the audio recordings. He watched in silence. He asked me how long this had been happening. I told him since early November at least. He asked why I hadn't reported it sooner. I told him I wasn't sure what I was reporting. He closed the file and handed it back to me. He said the equipment was clearly malfunctioning, generating phantom data, probably from residual calibration settings or electrical interference. He recommended we decommission room 4 until the issue was fully resolved. Room 4 has been offline for 3 weeks. But I still see the data sometimes late into the shift when the other patients are deep in REM and the control room is silent. The monitor for room 4 flickers on briefly, showing EEG traces and respiratory waveforms before going dark again. And I know that somewhere in the system the study is still running. Ainsley Holt is still sleeping, finally resting after years of fragmented nights. And the reports keep generating, documenting sleep she never got while alive. I've stopped checking room 4. I just monitor my assigned patients and complete my shift. But some studies don't end when the patient leaves. They just continue night after night, recording rest that exists outside of waking life. Story 6. The hospital laboratory scientist's contaminated control. I'd been a medical laboratory scientist at Redwood Regional for 13 years, working the graveyard shift in the clinical chemistry department. My primary role involved running automated analyzers, processing blood samples, and ensuring quality control across all test results. Night shift in the lab was methodical work. Fewer stat orders, more time for maintenance, calibration, and quality assurance protocols. The chemistry analyzer, a Siemens Atelica, processed hundreds of tests per shift, measuring everything from glucose and electrolytes to liver enzymes and cardiac markers. Quality control was non-negotiable. Every day before processing patient samples, we ran control materials through the analyzer. These were manufactured samples with known values designed to prove the machine was measuring accurately. If the control results fell within acceptable ranges, we could trust the patient results. If the controls failed, we'd halt testing, troubleshoot the analyzer, and repeat the controls until the system validated. It was a fundamental safeguard, a daily confirmation that our results were reliable. The standard protocol involved 3 control levels: low, normal, and high. Each control was a separate vial of synthetic serum with predetermined target values for every analyte we measured. The controls were stable, consistent, and manufactured to exacting standards. They weren't supposed to vary beyond narrow statistical limits. The anomaly started on October 22nd. I ran the morning quality control at 12:15 a.m. as I did every shift. Low control passed, normal control passed, high control flagged. The result for potassium came back at 8.4 milliequivalents per liter. The acceptable range for the high control was 5.2 to 6.1. 8.4 was critically elevated, the kind of value that would trigger immediate medical intervention if it appeared in a patient. But this was a control. It shouldn't have had a value outside its expected range. I repeated the high control. Same result, potassium 8.6. I checked the lot number, confirmed the expiration date, inspected the vial for contamination. Everything looked normal. I ran a different vial from the same lot, potassium 8.3. I ran calibration verification. The analyzer passed. I ran the low and normal controls again. Both passed without issue. Only the high control and only the potassium result was aberrant. I documented the failure and switched to a backup lot of high control. The potassium result came back within range. I cleared the analyzer for patient testing and made a note to report the defective control lot to the manufacturer. By the end of the shift, I'd processed 73 patient samples. All results were normal, consistent, reportable. The following night, October 23rd, I ran the controls again. Low passed, normal passed, high control failed. This time, the backup lot I'd used the previous night showed an elevated potassium. 7.9. I repeated it. 8.1. I checked the analyzer calibration. No drift. I checked the reagents. All within expiration, stored correctly. I ran the low control for potassium specifically. It measured correctly. I ran a patient sample from the previous day's archived specimens. The result matched the original value. The analyzer was functioning properly for actual patient samples. Only the high control was aberrant. I escalated the issue to the day shift supervisor, Linda. She reviewed the data and agreed it was unusual. She contacted the manufacturer and requested a technical review. They analyzed our lot numbers, checked production records, and found no issues. They suggested we might have a storage problem, temperature fluctuation affecting the control stability. We checked the refrigeration logs. Temperature had remained constant. They recommended switching to a completely new lot, different production batch, different shipment. We did. The new lot arrived on October 25th. I ran the new high control on October 26th, potassium 8.7. I stared at the result. A different lot, different production date, different manufacturing batch. Same aberrant potassium. I ran every other analyte in the control. Glucose, sodium, chloride, calcium, creatinine, all within expected ranges. Only potassium was elevated consistently across every lot we tested. I began documenting the pattern in detail. Every night I ran the high control multiple times. Every night the potassium came back critically elevated. I started comparing the values to patient results from the same shifts. I noticed something. On nights when the high control showed potassium above 8, we'd inevitably have at least one patient with a similar result. Not identical, but elevated beyond normal range between 6 and 8.5. I pulled 2 weeks of data and cross-referenced it. The correlation was undeniable. When the control failed high, patient samples showed elevated potassium. When I forced the analyzer to accept the failed control and continue testing, subsequent patient results trended higher. Not every patient, but enough to be statistically significant. It was as if the control was predicting abnormalities in patient samples before they were drawn. I brought the data to Linda. She reviewed it and suggested confirmation bias. I was looking for a pattern and finding one where none existed. Elevated potassium wasn't uncommon. Renal patients, certain medications, hemolyzed samples. There were clinical explanations. I asked her to review the specific patient cases. She did. Several had no clear cause for hyperkalemia. Healthy individuals, no kidney disease, no medications that would elevate potassium. And yet, their results were elevated, flagged, and confirmed on repeat testing. Linda ran the control herself during a day shift. Potassium came back within range. She ran it again at the end of her shift just before I arrived. Still normal. I arrived at 10 p.m. and ran the same control, same vial, same analyzer. Potassium, 8.2. Linda watched me do it. She repeated the test herself, standing next to me, using the same protocol. Her result came back normal. Mine came back elevated. We switched positions. She operated the analyzer while I observed. Normal result. I operated the analyzer while she observed. Elevated result. We ran 10 consecutive controls alternating who loaded the sample and initiated the test. Every time I ran it, elevated. Every time she ran it, normal. Same vial, same machine, same protocol. The only variable was who performed the test. Linda suggested I take a few days off. I told her I felt fine. She said it wasn't about how I felt, it was about troubleshooting the issue. If I wasn't present, maybe the controls would stabilize. I took 4 days off. Linda covered my shifts. She ran the high control every night. All results came back normal. I returned on November 2nd. I ran the high control at 12:20 a.m. Potassium, 9.1. I started researching the control lot history. I traced the lot numbers back through purchasing records, finding the original order dates and shipment details. One of the lot numbers, the first one that had failed, had been in inventory since 2019. I checked the associated records. That lot had been used routinely from 2019 through early 2021, then placed in backup storage when newer lots arrived. No documented issues during its active use. I pulled archived quality control data from that period. I found anomalies. Sporadic elevated potassium results, flagged but dismissed as isolated events. I checked who had been working those shifts. The name was unfamiliar. I searched employment records. Gregory Halford, clinical laboratory scientist, graveyard shift, hired August 2018, terminated March 2021. Termination reason, medical leave, did not return. I found his personnel file. Gregory had worked the same shift I work now, same responsibilities, same analyzer. I found incident reports, multiple quality control failures, primarily potassium on high controls. Escalated to management, no resolution documented. I found medical leave paperwork. Approved February 2021. Final employment date, March 19, 2021. I searched for further records. I found an obituary. Gregory Halford, deceased April 2021, age 41. Cause of death, hyperkalemia-induced cardiac arrest. I read the obituary 3 times. Hyperkalemia, critically elevated potassium. The same analyte that kept failing in the control samples. The same value appearing in patient results. I checked the dates. Gregory's final shift was March 18, 2021. He died 4 weeks later. I checked the quality control logs from March 18th. High control failed. Potassium 9.4. I checked my own medical records, routine physical from 6 months earlier. Potassium 4.1, normal. I requested a stat potassium test on myself. I drew my own blood, processed it on the analyzer. Result 4.3, still normal, but the high control I ran immediately afterward came back at 8.8. I reviewed Gregory's incident reports more carefully. He documented the same phenomenon, controls failing, patient results correlating, no equipment fault found. He'd escalated repeatedly. Management had attributed it to user error, inadequate technique, failure to follow protocol. He'd been placed on a performance improvement plan. The medical leave came 2 months later. I found one final document, a handwritten note scanned into his personnel file dated March 17, 2021. It read, "The controls are not testing the machine, they're testing us. When the values fail, it's not the analyzer, it's the operator. I don't know how to make them understand. My levels are rising, I can feel it. The machine knows before I do. I stopped running the high control. I used only low and normal levels, and I ran patient samples without the high control validation." Linda noticed and asked why. I told her the high control was irreparably compromised. She disagreed. She ran it herself, every shift before I arrived. Normal results every time. But the moment I took over, if I ran the control, it failed. I requested a transfer to day shift. The request was denied due to staffing needs. I requested a transfer to a different department, denied for the same reason. I requested extended leave, denied. I kept working. I stopped running the high control entirely. I just processed patient samples and hoped the analyzer remained accurate without full validation. On November 30th, I felt off, fatigued, muscle weakness, slight nausea. I drew my own blood and ran a full chemistry panel. Potassium, 6.8. Elevated, not critical, but abnormal. I ran it again. 7.1. I went to the emergency department. They repeated the test using a different analyzer. Potassium, 7.3. They admitted me for monitoring and treatment. I spent 3 days in the hospital. They ran tests. No kidney disease, no clear cause. The cardiologist said it was idiopathic hyperkalemia, possibly stress-induced. They treated me with insulin, glucose, and diuretics. My potassium normalized. They discharged me with follow-up instructions. I returned to work on December 5th. I ran the high control. Potassium, 4.9. Within range. I ran it again. 5.1. Normal. I ran it a third time. 5.0. The control had stabilized. I processed patient samples throughout the shift. No elevated potassium results. Everything normal. But I know it's not over. The controls don't just measure the machine, they measure something else, something the manufacturers never intended. And when the values start to fail, it's not a calibration problem, it's a warning. Some systems monitor more than chemistry, and once you're flagged in the data, the results keep updating, tracking changes inside you that haven't surfaced yet. I still work the graveyard shift, I still run the controls, but now I watch my own results as closely as the machines. Because I know the controls aren't testing the analyzer, they're testing me. Story 7, the medical examiner assigned to the wrong wing. I'd been a forensic pathologist and medical examiner at Brookhaven County Medical Center for 16 years. My primary responsibilities involved performing autopsies, determining cause of death, and providing medico-legal documentation for cases requiring investigation. The morgue was located in the sub-level of the medical center, a secure wing accessible only by authorized personnel. I worked variable hours, often overnight, depending on case volume and the need for expedited post-mortem examinations. The structure of the morgue was straightforward. The main autopsy suite contained 4 examination tables, refrigeration units for body storage, and a comprehensive array of pathology tools. Adjacent to the main suite was a secondary wing, older and less frequently used, containing 2 additional autopsy tables and storage for archived case materials. We called it the Annex. It had been operational until the early 2000s, when the main suite was expanded and modernized. Since then, the Annex had been used primarily for overflow storage and occasionally for teaching purposes when medical students rotated through our department. On December 7th, I received an unusual request. I was scheduled for a routine overnight shift, arriving at 10 p.m. to complete 3 pending autopsies. But when I checked my assignment board in the main office, I saw a 4th case listed with a notation directing me to the Annex. The case number was unfamiliar. The notation read, "Decedent in Annex, Table 1, complete examination per standard protocol." I checked the case details. No name listed, only a case number, A4731. No intake documentation, no investigator notes, no preliminary identification, just the instruction to examine the decedent in the Annex. I asked Violet, the overnight autopsy assistant, if she knew anything about the case. She checked her logs and said no body had been transferred to the Annex that evening. I told her the assignment board indicated otherwise. She suggested it might be an administrative error, a case from a previous shift that hadn't been closed out properly. I decided to check. I left the main suite and walked down the corridor to the Annex. The access door was locked, standard protocol. I used my keycard. The lock disengaged and I entered. The Annex was dim, lit only by emergency lighting. I flipped the overhead switches. The fluorescent lights hummed to life, casting the space in cold, even illumination. Table 1 sat in the center of the room, draped with a standard sheet. Beneath it, the outline of a body. I approached slowly. The sheet was clean, properly positioned. I checked the toe tag. Case number, A4731. Name field, blank. Date of death, December 7th. Today's date. Time of death, not listed. I pulled back the sheet. The body was that of a male. Approximate age 45 to 55, moderately built, no obvious external trauma. The skin was pale, consistent with recent death. Rigor mortis had not yet set in fully, suggesting death had occurred within the past 6 to 8 hours. I returned to the main office and checked the intake logs. No case numbered A4731 had been logged. I checked the previous day's logs. Nothing. I checked the digital case management system, no record of the case number. I called the on-duty intake coordinator. She confirmed no bodies had been delivered to the morgue that evening apart from the 3 I was already assigned. I told her about the case in the Annex. She said it was impossible. Nothing had been transferred there in months. I went back to the Annex. The body was still there, unchanged. I began the external examination, documenting findings as I would for any case. No signs of foul play, no defensive wounds, no ligature marks, no petechiae suggesting asphyxiation. The body appeared consistent with a natural death, possibly cardiac-related. I checked for identification. No wallet, no personal effects, no jewelry. The decedent was unidentified. I proceeded with the internal examination. Standard Y incision, organ removal, systematic dissection. The heart showed moderate atherosclerosis, but no acute infarction. The lungs were clear. The liver appeared normal. Toxicology samples collected. As I worked, I felt a growing sense of dissonance. The case was routine, unremarkable, and yet it existed outside every protocol and documentation system we used. I completed the autopsy at 2:37 a.m. Preliminary cause of death, probable cardiac arrhythmia. I sutured the incisions, covered the body, and returned to the main office to document my findings. I pulled up the case management system and attempted to file my report under case number A4731. The system rejected it. Case number not found. I tried to create a new case entry. The number was flagged as invalid outside the active case range. I called the intake coordinator again. She reiterated that no such case existed. I told her I'd just completed the autopsy. She asked me to describe the decedent. I provided the details. She checked her records and said no matching individual had been reported deceased or transferred to the morgue. I asked her to come down to the annex and verify. She arrived 15 minutes later. We entered the annex together. Table 1 was empty. The sheet was folded neatly at the foot of the table. No body, no evidence of the examination I'd just completed. I looked at the floor. No blood, no fluids, no tissue fragments. I checked the instrument tray. The tools I'd used were clean, arranged in their standard positions. I opened the biohazard disposal container. Empty. The coordinator looked at me with concern and asked if I'd been feeling well. I told her I'd just completed a full autopsy on this table. She asked where the body was. I didn't have an answer. She suggested I take a break, maybe go home early. I told her I was fine. She said she'd note the incident in her log and recommended I speak with the department director in the morning. I returned to the main suite and completed my assigned autopsies. The 3 cases progressed normally, documented, filed, and closed without issue. But I couldn't stop thinking about the annex. At 5:43 a.m., just before my shift ended, I checked the assignment board one more time. The 4th case was still listed. Decedent in Annex, Table 1, case number A4731. I went back to the annex. The body was there again, draped, tagged, waiting. I pulled back the sheet, the same decedent. But the Y incision I'd sutured was gone. The body was intact, unexamined, as if I'd never touched it. I checked the toe tag. Same case number. Date of death still listed as December 7th. But the time of death field, previously blank, now read 0237, the exact time I'd completed the first autopsy. I left the annex and went home. I didn't file a report, I didn't speak to the director, I just tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the body on Table 1 intact and waiting. I worked my next shift on December 10th. The assignment board listed 3 cases, all in the main suite. No mention of the annex. I completed my work without incident. But at 3:18 a.m., I felt compelled to check. I walked to the annex, used my key card, and entered. Table 1 was occupied, same body, same draping, same toe tag. Case number A4731. I pulled back the sheet. The decedent's appearance had changed slightly. The features were similar but subtly different. The age seemed closer to my own. Mid-40s, the build was familiar. I checked for identification again. This time I found something. A hospital ID badge clipped to the inside of the sheet. The badge photo showed the decedent's face. The name read, Dr. Nathan Cross. My name, my photo, my credentials. I looked at the body again. The resemblance was undeniable. I was looking at myself, deceased, laid out on an autopsy table in a wing that wasn't supposed to be in use. I checked the toe tag again. Date of death, December 10th, today. Time of death, 0318, the exact time I'd entered the annex. I backed away from the table. I left the annex, locked the door, and returned to the main suite. I checked the clock, 3:19 a.m. I checked my pulse, elevated but present. I checked my reflection in the glass of a cabinet. I looked tired, pale, but alive. I completed the remaining cases on my schedule and left the morgue at 6:35 a.m. I haven't returned to the annex since. but I check the assignment board every shift. The fourth case is always there, listed but never acknowledged by anyone else. And sometimes late into the overnight hours when the morgue is silent and the refrigeration units hum their steady rhythm, I wonder which version of me is real. The one completing autopsies in the main suite, documenting cases and filing reports, or the one waiting in the annex on table 1 under a draped sheet, case number A4731, cause of death yet to be determined. Some examinations never conclude. They just continue night after night in wings we're not supposed to access, on bodies we're not supposed to recognize, proving that the line between examiner and examined is thinner than the sheets we use to cover them.